I didn't blink at first. The numbers on the screen blurred, rearranged as if my eyes were trying to correct what my gut already knew was wrong. My house fund, $50,000 I'd scraped together over years of cutting corners, skipping dinners out saying no when everyone else said yes, was gone. Not withdrawn in small bites, not eaten away by mistake. One clean sweep, a perfect subtraction, the kind you don't recover from overnight. My hand shook the glow of the bank app, bleaching my face in the darkened room. I refreshed once, twice. The number didn't come back. $50,000 had collapsed into a measly $127, like the entire scaffold of my future had been kicked out from under me. And before I even had time to feel the floor vanish, my phone buzzed again. A notification from Instagram. I tapped it with a kind of numb instinct. And there she was, Celine, my sister, perfectly angled in front of a leased car, hair caught in golden light. She probably waited an hour to find captions stamped in bold confidence, self-made queen. The words clawed at my throat. Self-made. As if my years of saving, budgeting, every paycheck down to the dime clipping coupons, rejecting myself from joy, had all been her launchpad. She didn't just drain me. She posted it, weaponized it, wrapped my labor in hashtags, and called it independence. I wanted to throw the phone, but instead I scrolled. Comment after comment, clapping emojis, fire emojis. Strangers saying, "You're such an inspiration." No one saw the wreckage behind the frame. No one cared about the hands that had built the ladder she was standing on. She wasn't a queen. She was a thief with a ring light. My chest tightened as I remembered every time Celine had called me stingy, every time she mocked my notebooks full of expense tracking. Every Saturday night I stayed home while she posted cocktails and rooftop selfies. I told myself it was worth it, that one day I'd turn the key in the lock of my own home and know that every brick was paid for with discipline. Now she'd torched it all for an image. I saw her smile in the photo too wide, rehearsed a performance for the invisible jury of followers she fed like an altar. My stomach churned. She didn't just betray me. She rewrote the story in real time, erasing me from the credits. My silence had become her content. The rage wasn't loud. It was surgical precise, the kind that sits under your ribs like a blade waiting to be turned. I thought of my parents, how they'd probably say, "Don't make a scene, Iris. Family is family." She just needed help. They would nod along with Celine's performance because it looked good, because Corinne loved family image more than fairness, because Victor would sign anything shoved in front of him like it was just another receipt at dinner. But Amara's voice cut through the fog in my mind, steady and sharp from a conversation months back. Document everything. Always. Screenshots, emails, transfers. Don't wait until it's too late. I realized with a hollow ache it was already too late for the money. But maybe not too late for the truth. I took a screenshot of the bank app. Then another of Celine's post, her smug caption glowing like neon. My hands steadied as I saved them into a folder labeled simply receipts. Because this wasn't just about dollars. This was about the story she thought she could own. The story she thought no one would challenge because she had the spotlight and I only had silence. But silence doesn't last forever. Not when it's been stolen from you. If someone's ever taken your effort, your sacrifice, your voice, and called it self-made, press 1. If you've been spared that kind of theft. Press 0, because tonight I found out the real cost of family, and it was everything I'd saved. The mug was warm in my hands, steam curling up in soft spirals, the kind of small ritual I clung to when the world felt frayed. Chamomile honey stirred in slow circles, the one luxury I let myself have on weeknights, after long days balancing numbers for other people's companies. I'd learned to count calmness as carefully as I counted money. Both were hard-won. Then came the sound. A sharp ping from my phone. Not the gentle chime of a message, not the dull hum of a calendar reminder. It was the notification I'd come to fear and respect, my bank app alert. My thumb hovered before I swiped, a reflexive hesitation, like opening a door you already suspect hides a storm. And there it was. The balance. Not 50,000 anymore. Not the ruin I'd seen before. Now it bled out further, like a wound that refused to clot. 12 743s. I stared at the numbers, my breath catching in the hollow of my chest. It wasn't just the loss. It was the precision of it, the way the digits looked cold, clinical, indifferent. I whispered the number out loud as if naming it might steady me. 12,743. The words tasted metallic, like pennies on my tongue. My grip tightened around the mug. The steam fogged my glasses, blurred the edges of the room. I blinked hard and the hot ceramic nearly slipped from my hands. I set it down too quickly. Tea sloshing over the rim onto the counter, staining the wood like a spreading bruise. My voice trembled before I could catch it, the sound small and cracking like paper tearing. But I forced it back down, swallowing the quake, pressing it into the deepest corners of my lungs. I couldn't afford to break, not yet. Because breaking wouldn't change the digits. Breaking wouldn't restore the balance. Breaking wouldn't undo the transfer Selena had made while the world applauded her curated crown of hashtags. I thought of her Instagram caption again. The words self-made queen now seared behind my eyelids. She wasn't just draining money. She was draining the marrow of years. Every overtime shift, every night I chose tea over wine, bus rides over ride shares, leftovers over fresh takeout. All of it had funneled here into this moment, into this account. And now it was dissolving before my eyes line by line, zero by zero. My hands shook as I opened the transaction history. Each debit marched across the screen like soldiers, ruthless and final. Large sums, clean withdrawals, timed almost rhythmically. She hadn't been careless. She'd been deliberate. And the realization made my skin prickle. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call her right then, demand an answer, demand anything. But the words clung to the walls of my throat, heavy with a strange kind of shame. Not shame that I'd been robbed, but shame that I had trusted, that I had believed in family as a lock strong enough to keep the door shut. And through the tremor of my chest, I remembered Corinne's voice, soft but sharp as glass. Family image matters, Iris. We don't air dirty laundry. We solve it quietly. Solve it. Quietly. The way she had smoothed over every fracture growing up until silence became the only wallpaper holding our walls together. But silence didn't feel like an option now. Silence felt like complicity. Still, I kept my body rigid, forced my breath, even forced the tremor into a clenched jaw. My voice wanted to shake, but I pressed it flat like pressing creases out of a dress you'll never wear again. Because if Selene could narrate her theft as triumph, then I would narrate my survival as evidence. I reached for my phone again, not to call, not to beg, but to capture. Screenshot after screenshot, the balance, the withdrawals, the times, the dates. Each image a receipt, each one a small anchor in the storm. $12, $743 left. It was less than a third of what I had, but it was still mine. And if there was one thing I had learned as an accountant, it was this. Numbers may bend under lies, but they never break. They remain. They testify. So I steadied my voice in the quiet kitchen, whispered to no one but myself. Not gone. Not erased. Not yet. And in that whisper, trembling but contained, I felt the smallest flicker of resolve ignite beneath the wreckage. The drizzle had started soft a mist over the highway that caught the headlights and scattered them like glass dust. My wipers squeaked across the windshield in slow rhythm, the sound too loud in the silence of the car. I should have stayed home. I should have curled back into the couch with my spreadsheets and bitter chamomile, but something inside me had twisted after the ping after the numbers on the app crumbled again. My body refused stillness. I needed to move to outrun the tightness in my chest. The highway stretched ahead, slick with rain, every taillight smeared into a long red ribbon. I drove slow, careful, clutching the wheel harder than I needed to. The drizzle tapped at the roof like an impatient hand. My thoughts chased themselves in loops. 12,743, gone soon, gone sooner than I could rebuild, gone into Celine's curated kingdom of filters and captions. Then I saw it. A flash of color weaving through the gray, a cherry-red convertible top-down despite the rain. Drops glittered on its hood like diamonds under the lamps. My stomach clenched before I even registered the plate. Cell stars. I said it aloud, a whisper sharpened by disbelief. She had always wanted her name in lights. Now she had it stamped in metal, a moving billboard of vanity slicing through drizzle and asphalt. Celine's car cut into my lane, sleek and brazen music faintly bleeding into the air. I couldn't hear the lyrics, but I could see her head tilt the way she tossed her hair back, even when no one was watching. Except, of course, someone was always watching. That was the point. Her audience was invisible, but constant and imagined crowd cheering her every merge, every pose. Rain peppered my windshield harder. I flicked the wipers faster, heart hammering, as I trailed a few cars behind her. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That car was more than metal and debt. It was my savings wearing wheels. It was my house fund rebranded into horsepower and leather seats. Every drop of rain seemed to hiss against it like the world itself was mocking me. She braked, suddenly swerved, then accelerated as if she owned not just the car but the road itself. And in a way, she did, because she'd stolen the foundation of my road. My house key. My quiet future. My sense of ground. She was driving my sacrifice like it was a joyride. The drizzle blurred the lines, and for a heartbeat, I wanted to follow her closer to pull alongside to make her see me. To roll down my window and shout the truth into the wet night. You're not self-made. You're not a queen. You're driving my life. But my throat locked. The words were molten, too heavy to lift. Instead, I gripped the wheel jaw, tight eyes locked on the glowing vanity plate. Cell Stars. The name burned neon in my vision, a brand carved into the dark. I thought of my mother again, how she would smile at this car, how she'd say Selene was ambitious, radiant, the kind of daughter people admired. I thought of my father, silent as always, signing whatever paper made it possible for her to drive away. The drizzle thickened drops streaking down the glass like tears I refused to let fall. My voice broke in my chest, but I forced it flat, swallowed it whole. Because tears would only blur the view further, and I needed clarity. I needed to remember this sight, this moving theft, this proof. I reached for my phone at the red light, thumb, quick heart pounding. One photo, the vanity plate gleaming against the rain. Another shot, her hair caught in the wind. Her hand draped carelessly over the wheel, a smirk carved into the rear view. Evidence. Receipts. The light turned green. I let her go, watched her car disappear into the wet blur of traffic taillights melting into the drizzle. My own car felt heavier, smaller like a box of restraint, while hers screamed freedom on wheels. But even as she vanished, something steadied inside me. The sight of her wasn't just humiliation. It was confirmation. Proof that my silence had been converted into spectacle, that my sacrifice had been paved into her stage. And proof could be powerful if you knew how to wield it. I drove on, rain humming steady against the roof, the photo of her plate glowing faintly on my phone screen. Cell Stars. Evidence number 3. In the drizzle, I whispered to myself, voice low but certain, she thinks the road belongs to her. But she doesn't know I'm still here. And I'm keeping score. The rain had followed me home like an uninvited guest. It clung to my coat, dripped from my hair, streaked across the driveway until puddles shimmered under the porch light. I thought for a second about pulling away, about circling the block until my breath calmed. But then I saw the glow through the windows, the kind of warm, curated light Selene always chose for photo shoots, and I knew it wasn't a private night. It was a performance. I parked at the curb, engine still humming, and for a moment I sat frozen behind the wheel hands, gripping the steering like it was the last boundary I had. Then laughter cracked open the air. Not just any laughter. My mother's light rehearsed the laugh she used when she wanted neighbors to know we were thriving. I stepped out into the drizzle. The scent of wet concrete filled my lungs. And there they were. My parents standing on the driveway, champagne flutes in hand, rain misting their hair, but ignored like it wasn't even there. Between them, beaming like she'd just conquered Wall Street, stood Selene. The red convertible gleamed behind her droplets, beating on its hood like jewels on velvet. Victor raised his glass first. My father's voice was steady, almost ceremonial. To Selene, he said as though reading off a script. For her success, her ambition, her bright future. I froze at the edge of the drive coat, still clinging damp against my body, invisible in the halo of their celebration. My chest tightened, breath shallow, like I'd walked into someone else's movie where my role had been cut. Corinne followed, her smile wide, her glass tilting just enough for the gold bubbles to catch the porch light. "To our star," she said. A true inspiration. Their voices carried over the drizzle, sharp enough to cut through me. To Celine, to her ambition, to her success. The words echoed in my skull louder than the rain. My stomach churned as I watched them sip, watched Selene tilt her head back and laugh like she'd earned every syllable. She raised her own glass rosé, sparkling against the wet night, and clinked it lightly against theirs. "Thank you," she purred. "This is only the beginning." My throat went dry. This was the toast I'd imagined for myself one day when I finally bought a home, when I turned the key and showed them that all the careful years of saving meant something. Instead, they toasted her for gutting me. They toasted her with my money in her gas tank, my house fund gleaming in chrome and leather. The drizzle slid down my face, salt mixing with water, but I wouldn't let myself cry. Crying would make it look like grief. This wasn't grief. It was betrayal masquerading as celebration. I shifted on the curb, arms crossed against the cold. Not one of them looked my way. Not my father, not my mother, not my sister draped in champagne glow. I could have vanished into the rain and they would have gone on, laughing glasses raised, convinced they were honoring brilliance rather than theft. Invisible. That's what I was in that moment. Not Iris, not the one who saved, not the one who planned. Just silence, dressed in a damp coat, staring at the driveway that had been transformed into a stage where Celine played the star and I was barred from even the credits. My jaw ached from clenching. The sound of glass against glass rattled through me like a bell tolling for what was lost. My voice wanted to break free, wanted to shout, "You're celebrating my ruin," but the words strangled themselves before they reached air. Because if I spoke, Corinne would hush me, Victor would frown, Celine would smirk, and I would be the problem. Again. Always. So I stood there, a shadow at the edge of the glow. Rain dripping from my fingertips, soaking my shoes, anchoring me to the silence that had always been my role. And as they toasted Celine like she'd been promoted to royalty, I reached for my phone in my pocket. Fingers trembling. Not to call anyone. Not to join. To document. I snapped a photo, their 3 glasses raised against the drizzle. Celine in the middle, champagne, catching the light like it was liquid gold. Evidence. Another receipt. Proof that they celebrated theft as triumph, that they crowned her with my crown and handed me the cloak of invisibility. I saved the photo screen dim against the wet night and whispered into the cold air no one could hear. One day this toast will taste like ashes. The house was too quiet when I walked back in. Not the kind of quiet that soothes you, but the kind that hums with everything unspoken. My coat clung damp to my shoulders, the faint scent of rain mixing with the ink of unopened mail stacked on the counter. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I didn't need warm lamplight or comfort. What I needed was evidence. I dropped my keys onto the table, their metallic clatter echoing through the kitchen like a gavel. My hands still trembled, not with shock anymore, but with focus, sharp, cold, methodical. The accountant in me surfaced, the part of me trained to track every cent, to see patterns where others saw noise. If Celine wanted to build a story, I would build a case. I opened my laptop, the glow harsh in the dim kitchen. Fingers stiff, I logged into the bank portal, the one place where lies collapsed into numbers. The statements loaded line by line, and with each withdrawal, my chest tightened, but I didn't look away. I scrolled, slow, deliberate, like turning pages in a confession. There it was. The $50,000 gone in one clean sweep, the balance bleeding out again days later. But it wasn't just the amounts. It was the signature digital scrawled across an authorization form like it meant nothing. Not Celine's. My mother's. Corinne. Her name glared back at me from the PDF. Tidy rehearsed the same flourish she used when signing holiday cards. My throat constricted, heat rising under my skin. She hadn't just excused Celine's theft. She had facilitated it, signed it like a grocery receipt, like another bill, like I was an inconvenience to be rubber-stamped away. I printed the document, the whir and churn of the machine filling the silence. The pages spat out warm-smelling faintly of toner crisp in my hands. I placed them in a folder I pulled from the bottom drawer of my desk. On the front, in thick black marker, I wrote, Exhibit A. It looked almost absurd, like something out of a courtroom drama. But that's what this was becoming. A trial where my family played judge, jury, and thief. And if they thought I would play the silent witness, they hadn't accounted for how silence can turn into record. I tucked the first printout inside A1. Bank withdrawal. Signed by my mother. I sat back for a moment, staring at the folder on the desk. It was plain, ordinary beige, the kind you'd find in any office supply store. But in my house in this moment, it became armor. Proof against erasure. The rain outside deepened, rattling faintly against the window pane. I leaned forward, pressing the folder flat with both palms as if anchoring myself to the weight of it. Because here was the truth they could toast on the driveway, they could post captions under golden light, but paper does not lie. Signatures do not vanish, and numbers keep their own memory. My phone buzzed again, another notification, another reminder that the story Celine was telling the world was already spreading. But I didn't open Instagram. I didn't need to see her pretending to be a queen again. I needed to stay right here with the receipts. I labeled another divider inside the folder A2. Empty for now, but waiting. Waiting for the next slip, the next signature, the next shred of proof that the performance wasn't reality. Because once you start archiving, you see the world differently. Every document becomes a witness. Every careless flourish of a pen becomes a confession. I exhaled slowly, my voice breaking into the stillness, low but resolute. You wrote me out. Now I'll write you down. The words steadied me. My pulse slowed. The ache in my chest shifted into something sturdier. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about narrative. About who got to define truth. Celine could chase stars on her license plate. Corinne could toast family image. Victor could keep signing away his silence. But I had the folder. And the folder had me. On the front, in thick black ink, Exhibit A glared back like a challenge. And I whispered one last time, almost like a vow. This is only the beginning. The folder sat heavy on the desk, its beige spine like a blade against the shadows. Exhibit A. I should have stopped there. I should have closed the drawer locked. The cabinet told myself I'd done enough for one night. But once you start looking, once you peel back one layer of silence, you can't help but wonder what else is hiding underneath. I pulled open the bottom drawer papers, rustling the scent of dust and ink rising like an old confession. Receipts, tax returns, pay stubs sorted in neat chronological piles. My life reduced to paper. My discipline documented. I thought I knew every sheet in that drawer because order was my armor and surprises were the enemy. But then my fingers brushed something different. Thicker. Sealed. I tugged it out and froze. An envelope. Plain white, the corners yellowing with time, the flap still glued shut. Across the front in black pen, my name Iris. The letters curved with familiarity, too familiar. My mother's handwriting. The date was scrawled smaller in the corner, 2018. The air in the room seemed to thin. My pulse drummed against my temples. 2018. The year I started my house fund. The year I skipped vacations, turned down dinners, told myself sacrifice was temporary. All those nights tallying figures, making the future real while this envelope sat hidden in the drawer, waiting like a ghost. I held it in both hands, the paper soft but unyielding, weightier than it should have been. My thumb traced the seal, tempted to tear it open to finally know. But something inside me recoiled, because truth once revealed can't be folded back. And the thought of what could be written inside an admission, a betrayal, a plan I was never told, tightened my throat. The drizzle outside had thickened into rain, tapping against the glass in quick bursts. It sounded like a clock counting down, daring me to act. My breath came shallow, fogging the envelope faintly as I whispered the date again, 2018. The year Celine's PR career suddenly bloomed. The year new clothes, new gadgets, new dinners appeared without explanation. The year my parents' smiles seemed tighter. My father signing more papers, my mother hosting more brunches. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I shoved it back into the drawer, slid it under the stack of bank statements as though burying it could delay its truth. My hand lingered on the wood a moment longer, pressing the drawer shut with deliberate force as if sealing the secret back where it came from. But the thing about envelopes is they don't disappear. They wait. Even with the drawer closed, I felt its presence heavy humming at the edges of my thoughts. Every line I'd drawn, every folder I'd labeled, every receipt I'd printed, none of it could eclipse the mystery of that sealed flap with my name. I turned back to Exhibit A, tried to steady myself by flipping through the printouts. Numbers, dates, transactions, things I could control. But the envelope burned at the back of my mind like an unlit fuse. Because evidence doesn't just expose the past. Sometimes it warns of the future. And whether I was ready to admit it or not, that envelope sealed, dated written in my mother's hand, was a message from the fracture line I hadn't seen forming years ago. I whispered into the empty kitchen voice, flat brittle. Not tonight. Then I turned off the lamp, leaving the folder on the desk, the envelope buried again, but louder in silence than any document I'd held in my hands. Morning light was gray and reluctant, the kind that makes everything look unfinished. I hadn't slept, my body had given up on the idea hours ago. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, Exhibit A, still open beside a half-cold cup of coffee. The folder stared back at me like a witness I hadn't yet called to the stand. I was scrolling absently through my inbox when the subject line caught me sharp as a blade. County records. Urgent. It was from Lillian, a broker I'd worked with before, the kind of woman who never missed a comma, never mistyped a date. She didn't email lightly. My finger hovered before I clicked, dread curling in my stomach. Her words were simple. Clinical, stripped of sympathy. I thought you should be aware. The Vale property on Hanover Drive was transferred 6 months ago. Title now lists Celine Vale. Attached certified record. I blinked once, twice, as though the lines might rearrange themselves into something less brutal. But the attachment waited, undeniable. My chest tightened as I opened the PDF. There it was, a county seal embossed in digital ink, the ledger of ownership, cold and final. My parents' names scratched out by bureaucracy, replaced with my sister's clean and proud Celine Vale. The room tilted. For a second, I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, nails biting into the wood. 6 months. Half a year. While I was saving receipts, cutting expenses, dreaming of a house of my own, my childhood home. The place I thought still belonged to both of them had already been handed over like a gift wrapped in deceit. And no one told me. Not a word. I read the lines again, searching for loopholes. Mistakes, typos that could absolve them. But the county doesn't make typos on deeds. Property doesn't change hands by accident. Somewhere in a sterile office, my father's signature, quiet, efficient, obedient, had transferred history. Somewhere my mother had smiled, telling herself it was for family image. I thought of Celine raising her glass in the driveway while rain kissed her convertible. I thought of her vanity plate, her captions, her kingdom of illusion. She wasn't just borrowing from me anymore. She was owning everything. Land, name, legacy. They had crowned her not just queen of image, but queen of foundation. And I was written out of the record like I had never been born into this family at all. My hands shook as I printed the email. Then the deed, the seal, every page the county had attached. The printer words spitting out truth I couldn't unsee. I slid them into the folder behind the first divider, A2. The paper was still warm when I pressed it flat, labeling it in thick black marker, property transfer, 2023. Exhibit A was growing heavier by the hour, its spine bending with betrayal. I sat back, breath shallow, staring at the neat stack of proof. My parents hadn't just celebrated Celine. They had institutionalized her lies, legalized her theft. The county didn't care about the story behind the signatures. All it cared about was the ink. And that ink had erased me. The bitterness rose hot in my throat. I wanted to scream, to hurl the folder across the room, to shatter something that could mirror the fracture inside me. But instead, I did what I had always done. I documented. I controlled the uncontrollable. I opened a new document on my laptop, typed in bold at the top, case file, Vale versus Silence. Because that's what this was. Not just a family feud. Not just a sister's betrayal. This was silence weaponized signatures turned into scalpels, love translated into ledger lines. And if they thought silence would keep me compliant, they had underestimated what happens when the invisible start keeping score. I closed my eyes for a moment, hearing the rain soften outside the hum of the refrigerator filling the cracks of the room. My voice, low and deliberate, broke the quiet. 6 months ago, they erased me from the house. But they forgot I keep records too. And as the words left my mouth, I realized something steady had taken root under the ache. Resolve. Not rage, not grief. Resolve. Because Exhibit A wasn't just a folder anymore. It was a weapon. The invitation hadn't come directly, of course. It slipped to me through whispers, a cousin's careless mention, the kind of information that spreads like perfume at the edge of a room. They hadn't wanted me there, but I went anyway. Not to join, not to belong, to observe. The night air was thick with the residue of drizzle cool on my skin as I walked up the brick path toward the Calderon's rented event hall. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed overhead, their golden glow blinking against the dark. Balloons in metallic rose and silver swayed in the breeze, tied to railings as if trying to escape. Laughter spilled out in warm bursts whenever the doors opened each sound, reminding me that this family knew how to host a stage better than it knew how to hold the truth. I slipped inside the hum of chatter wrapping around me like static. Tables were dressed in white linens, edges crisp as if ironed to perfection. Glasses clinked, phones flashed, and in the center of it all stood Celine draped in satin, her hair falling in waves that caught the light, her smile already rehearsed for cameras. She looked radiant. That was her skill to glow in borrowed light. She held the microphone like it had been waiting for her all along, nails gleaming under the bulbs as if even her hands were designed for spectacle. Tonight isn't about me. She began, voice soft enough to tug the room closer. It's about us, about the family that's been my anchor, my strength, my everything. The crowd responded on cue with a murmur of agreement, polite applause. My stomach tightened. She always knew how to build suspense, how to draw people into her orbit. I lingered at the back, pressed into the shadow of a pillar, trying to stay unseen. And then came the sentence. Delivered with a perfect pause, her hand pressed lightly to her chest, eyes shimmering just enough to suggest tears that weren't there. She's the rock this family needed. My ears rang. For a moment, the words disoriented me, as if she were speaking about me, about the years I'd been steady, silent, responsible. But then her gaze slid toward my mother, toward Corinne, who beamed back at her like a proud director watching her star nail the line. The applause swelled. Glasses lifted. I felt myself dissolve. Not a rock, not even a pebble. Just air at the back of the room while Celine stood in the spotlight I had unknowingly paved. She was rewriting history in real time, feeding the crowd the story of her resilience, her independence, her role as savior. And no one questioned it. Why would they? Her voice was velvet, her posture flawless. Her narrative tied in a bow of charm. The champagne flutes chimed again, synchronized like an orchestra. My father raised his glass, silent as ever, nodding along as if the words were law. My mother's laugh punctuated the moment, bright and staged, and I soaked in shadow watched as my sister collected accolades for a stability that had never belonged to her. I swallowed hard, the air sharp in my throat. I thought of the envelope from 2018 buried in the drawer. I thought of the county record with her name stamped over my parents. I thought of the folder on my desk, Exhibit A, growing thicker by the day. And I realized this was more than performance. This was indoctrination. Every toast, every caption, every speech wasn't just for strangers online. It was for family to solidify the myth until no one remembered otherwise. The fairy lights blurred at the edges of my vision. I blinked hard, grounding myself in the sound of clinking forks and bursts of laughter. My body wanted to bolt, to flee the suffocating glow. But I stayed. Because leaving would mean giving her the narrative uncontested. Staying meant collecting another receipt. I pulled out my phone, angled it discreetly. One photo, Celine with her hand pressed to her chest face, tilted up toward the lights. Another, Corinne's smile stretched wide, Victor's glass raised like a seal of approval. Screenshots from my folder evidence of the performance that painted me invisible. She's the rock this family needed. The words still echoed sharp as glass, but deep beneath the ache, something steadier stirred. Rocks don't need applause. Rocks endure. And if Celine wanted to wear the crown of resilience, I would bide my time with the truth, patient, heavy, undeniable. I lowered my phone, slipped it back into my pocket, and whispered into the hum of celebration no one heard. Even rocks erode, but paper lasts. I thought I was prepared. I had braced myself for speeches for champagne, for Selene's curated glow under fairy lights. But nothing steadied me for what I found when I slipped into the quieter part of the house, the hallway where the air always smelled faintly of lemon polish, where every family milestone had once lived in frames. The wall of photos. It had been there my whole life, an evolving gallery of who we were supposed to be. Birthdays, graduations, vacations with matching shirts. Growing up, I used to trace the edges of those frames with my fingertips, proof that I belonged somewhere, even if silence always seemed to follow me like a shadow. But tonight, under the glow of recessed lights, I saw what had changed. I stopped in my tracks. My breath caught. The collage had been redone. New prints, new arrangements, fresh frames. And in each one, Celine glowed larger than life. Her smile, her posture, her golden hair caught mid-laugh, it all radiated like a brand campaign. The photos had been chosen carefully, almost obsessively, to build her as the centerpiece. And me, I wasn't there. Or rather, I was, but only in fragments. Cropped out of the frame. Edges of my shoulder, half an arm, the ghost of my outline blurred into the background. In one shot where I remembered standing right beside Celine at her college graduation, only she was visible, my side of the frame sliced clean away as if I'd never stood there at all. In another, a Christmas dinner, the photo zoomed close on her laugh while my face was swallowed by shadow at the edge. The message was clear. Iris, the careful one. The saver, the quiet presence erased. My throat tightened. I stepped closer, my reflection ghosting faintly across the glass. My hand rose before I could stop it, palm hovering over one frame. I remembered that night vividly, the birthday where I stayed late to clean dishes while Celine posed for selfies. In the original photo, I knew I had been there, smile small but real. But here, gone. The edit was so seamless it could convince anyone I'd never existed. Rage burned hot under my ribs, but grief sat heavier. Because this wasn't just theft of money or property. This was theft of presence. The rewriting of memory itself. Cropping me out wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. A family narrative retouched until Celine became the sun, and I was nothing but a shadow they had trimmed away. Behind me, laughter echoed faintly from the party, muffled by the walls. Celine's voice carried above the rest, warm and commanding, as though the whole house bent toward her orbit. My parents' voices joined in prideful approving. And here in this hallway shrine, the story was complete. Celine, the rock, the star, the center. Iris invisible. I swallowed the ache, steadying my hand against the frame. The glass was cool beneath my fingertips. I pressed harder as if touch alone could reclaim the space, pull me back into the image. But the photo didn't change. The erasure held. For a moment, the urge rose sharp to rip the frames down, scatter them across the polished floor, force the truth into view. But then I caught my reflection in the glass again. Tired eyes, tight jaw. And I remembered the folder waiting back home. Exhibit A, growing heavier each night. So instead of tearing the shrine apart, I did what I had learned to do. I documented. I pulled my phone from my pocket, snapped photos of the collage, the close-ups of Celine, the edges where I had been cropped out, the glaring imbalance of presence. Each picture saved into the folder on my phone, another entry for the case. A3, wall of photos. I slipped the phone back into my coat, heart pounding. My voice trembled when it broke free, quiet but steady. You can crop me out of frames, but you can't crop me out of the truth. The words hung in the hallway, unheard by anyone but me. I turned the sound of laughter and glasses clinking, swelling again as I walked back toward the lights. Behind me, the collage remained a wall of carefully curated lies. But in my pocket, proof lived. And proof, unlike photographs, doesn't fade. The envelope had been haunting me for days. Every time I passed the drawer, I felt its weight humming louder than any storm. I told myself I wasn't ready, that the silence was easier than knowing. But silence had already cost me too much. And tonight, after standing in front of that wall of photos where my smile had been cropped out like a flaw, I couldn't let the envelope win. I sat at my desk, the lamp's glow a small circle of defiance in the dark room. My hands trembled as I pulled the envelope free, its paper softer now from years of being handled, hidden, moved, but never opened. Across the front, my name, Iris. Below the date, 2018. I slid my thumb under the flap. The seal cracked with a brittle sigh like it had been waiting to breathe. Inside was a single folded sheet. My heart raced as I opened it, the print crisp, the letterhead unmistakable. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the 2018 National Fellowship in Financial Research. The words blurred, then sharpened again. My eyes scanned line after line, but my brain lagged behind. Fellowship. Selected. Full funding. Relocation stipend. It wasn't just an opportunity. It was the kind of break people dream about their entire lives. The kind that rewrites everything. And I had never known. The letter was addressed to me. Signed, sealed, delivered. But not to my hands. It had been intercepted, tucked away, buried under bank statements until it aged into silence. My pulse roared in my ears as the realization settled like ice in my spine. My mother, Corinne. Her handwriting was on the envelope. She had opened it. She had sealed it back up, scribbled my name like a placeholder, then shoved it into a drawer as if erasing the opportunity erased my right to choose. I saw it all in flashes, 2018, the year I wondered why no doors opened despite all my applications, the year I told myself maybe I wasn't enough, maybe I wasn't meant for more. I had blamed myself for the silence, for the rejection letters that never came. I thought maybe I hadn't deserved anything better. But I had. I had earned it. And she had stolen it. My throat burned. I clutched the paper, crumpling the edge, my vision swimming. All those years of sacrifice, of loyalty, of staying close because family needed me. She had manufactured that loyalty. She had clipped my wings before I could fly and then called me dutiful for staying. The betrayal was surgical. Not loud, not violent. A simple act of withholding. A choice to hide my destiny in a drawer so I could keep cleaning up after theirs. I thought of Celine, her convertible gleaming in the drizzle, her speeches, her wall of magnified smiles. She had been given the spotlight while I had been locked out of the theater entirely. And my mother had been the usher who barred the door. I read the letter again, fingers trembling, voice breaking as I whispered the opening line. We are pleased to inform you. The words felt poison, now a ghost of what should have been. For a moment, grief knocked the air from my lungs. The years I'd lost the path, I'd never walked the person I might have been, it all pressed heavy against me. But then, another feeling rose beneath the grief fire. Because this wasn't just a secret. It was proof, not just of theft, not just of betrayal, but of intent. Corinne hadn't merely chosen family image over truth. She had chosen Celine's shine over my future. And now I had the evidence in my hands. I laid the letter gently into Exhibit A, sliding it under its own divider, A4. Fellowship Letter 2018. The folder was no longer just a file. It was a ledger of betrayal, one they couldn't erase with smiles or speeches. I leaned back in my chair, my voice low, raw, steady in the glow of the lamp. You stole my chance. You buried my future. But paper remembers. The tears that came weren't weak. They were cleansing, sharp as glass. And when they dried, I felt something new take root where grief had sat. Not resignation. Not despair. Resolve. Because for every toast they raised, for every photo they cropped, for every lie they told, I now had proof. And proof speaks louder than image. If you found out someone had kept the letter that could have changed your life, hidden it to cage you where they wanted, would you forgive them? Press 1 if you would. Press 0 if you couldn't, because I know my answer. The cafe was half empty, the kind of place where the smell of espresso clung to the walls and conversations dropped into quiet corners. I chose a booth near the window, rain streaking down the glass like an old film reel. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the letter again, smoothing its creases against the table. The paper looked too fragile for what it carried, too ordinary to contain a betrayal of this scale. When Amara slid into the booth across from me, her presence steadied the air. She was always composed, tailored blazer hair, pulled back eyes sharp with the clarity of someone who lived by facts. No embellishments, no illusions. That's why I'd called her. I pushed the envelope toward her, read it. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the lines silently. I watched her face as the words landed. Her brow tightened, her lips pressed together in a hard line. And when she finally set the page down, her voice was low but certain. "They didn't just steal money," she said, meeting my eyes with a gaze that didn't flinch. "They stole who you could have become." The words cracked something open in me. My throat tightened, heat burning at the corners of my eyes. I had known it, had felt it, but hearing it aloud, framed so precisely, made it undeniable. They hadn't just drained my bank account or transferred the deed. They had buried a version of me, one that might have lived differently somewhere else in brighter light. I leaned back, exhaling shakily. "I thought I wasn't chosen," I whispered. "For years, I thought I wasn't enough, that I hadn't earned it. And all this time," my voice broke. "All this time, it was sitting in a drawer." Amara didn't reach for platitudes. She didn't try to soften the truth. She tapped the folder I had brought, its spine thick with labeled exhibits, bank withdrawals, county records, photos of cropped frames, and now this letter. "Iris, this is bigger than feelings. This is evidence. Documented, time-stamped, undeniable. You've been erased in silence, but now you have receipts." I pressed my palms flat against the table, grounding myself in the solid surface. But what does it matter? They'll never admit it. My mother will smile. My father will sign. Celine will just spin another narrative. They'll make me the bitter one, the jealous one, the problem. Amara's voice was calm, deliberate, cutting through the fog. That's what manipulators do. They rely on silence. They rely on your fear of being cast as the villain. But look at what you have, Iris. You don't just have stories. You have proof. Proof turns gaslighting into fraud. Proof changes the terrain. Her words landed heavy, steadying me like anchors. I pulled the fellowship letter closer, my fingers brushing the ink as if contact could restore the years I'd lost. "This was supposed to be my turning point," I said, voice trembling. "And they locked it away." Amara leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Then let's make it one now." The rain outside quickened, streaks racing down the glass like time refusing to wait. I imagined the courtroom Amara knew so well, the neat folders, the stack of exhibits lined up in sequence. My folder sat between us, still plain, still beige, but now it felt different. It wasn't just a record of my erasure. It was the skeleton of a case, a map leading out of silence. I whispered, half to myself, half to her. I thought they were protecting family image. But they weren't. They were protecting Celine's spotlight. Amara nodded. "And in the process, they stole your stage. But you have the script now. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" I didn't answer right away. My hands tightened on the folder. Inside the fellowship letter rested alongside every other receipt, each page humming with the weight of truth. I thought of Celine's speeches, my mother's toasts, my father's silent signatures. I thought of the wall of photos where I had been cropped out, erased with precision. And I thought of this table, this cafe, this moment proof staring back at me, undeniable. Finally, I exhaled. My voice came low but steady, a vow shaped in the quiet. I want to take back the pen. The words surprised even me, but Amara nodded like she'd been waiting for them all along. The rain outside slowed, tapering into a mist. The cafe hummed softly around us, the espresso machine hissing in the background, a rhythm steady as breath. I gathered the folder into my arms, holding it close, the edges pressing firm against my chest. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt recorded, preserved, armed. And as I stood to leave, Amara's final words followed me strong and sharp. "They wrote you out. Now you'll write yourself back in." The living room smelled faintly of polished wood and perfume, the kind of careful staging my mother always insisted on when people might remember the scene. The curtains were drawn wide to let in afternoon light, illuminating every corner as though transparency could be faked with sunshine. A tray of untouched pastries sat on the coffee table props for civility, but the air was tight, humming with everything unsaid. Celine stood tall in the center of the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she shifted her weight. My father sat in his usual chair, silent as stone, his hands folded neatly as if waiting to sign another receipt. My mother hovered between them, smile stiff, her hands cradling something small and metallic. I recognized it instantly. A key. Corinne lifted it high, her voice warm but heavy with ceremony. "This," she said. Eyes shining toward Celine, is more than just a key. It's a symbol. It belongs to the future of this family. And Celine. Her smile deepened. "You've proven you're ready to carry it." Applause didn't follow. It didn't need to. The moment was staged for memory, not for sound. Selene extended her hand with a practiced grace, head tilted like she was already posing for a camera that wasn't there. I felt the floor shift beneath me. My chest burned. This was it, the script they'd written without me. The culmination of every cropped photo, every erased opportunity, every sealed envelope. The house, the legacy, the image, they were all being handed over in one small gesture, as if family history could be compressed into brass. My mother turned slightly, her eyes brushing past me as though I were furniture. "Iris, you understand?" She said lightly. "This is about moving forward, about what looks best." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The silence pressed hard, thick as glass, daring me to shatter it. My father's gaze stayed fixed on the floor. Celine's smirk widened, and in my chest, something cracked open. My voice came low, steady, trembling at first, but sharpening with every word. "I don't need the key." They all turned toward me, then surprise flickering across Celine's face, annoyance tightening my mother's jaw. I stepped forward, folder in hand, its spine solid against my palm. I lifted it just enough for the bold black letters to catch the light. Exhibit A. I already have Exhibit A. The words cut through the room like a blade. My mother's smile faltered. Celine blinked, her hand still hovering in the air, waiting for the key that suddenly felt less like a crown and more like a prop. My father shifted uncomfortable, the silence stretching too long for even him to hide in. I laid the folder on the table with deliberate weight. It landed with a thud louder than the pastries, louder than the silence. "Bank withdrawals signed in your name, Mother. County records transferring the house 6 months ago. Photos where I've been cropped out frame after frame." And this, I pulled out the fellowship letter, sliding it across the table until it touched her manicured hand. "The letter you stole from me. The life you buried in a drawer." Corinne's fingers twitched. She pulled her hand back as if the paper might burn. Celine's smirk collapsed, her face pale under the sunlight. My father cleared his throat but said nothing, his silence more damning than words. I straightened my breath, steady now. "You don't get to hand out keys to a kingdom you built on theft. You don't get to decide who belongs in the story. I may not have a lock to open, but I have the truth. And that unlocks more than any of you are prepared for." The room pulsed with tension, fragile as glass about to crack. My mother tried to recover, voice trembling under its veneer. "Iris, you're being dramatic. This is family. No." My interruption was sharp, final. "This isn't family. This is fraud dressed up as legacy." For the first time, Celine's shoulders slumped, her hand curling into a fist instead of reaching for the key. My mother's mouth opened, then closed, no words finding their way through. My father stared at the folder, eyes narrowed, as if the documents inside were more alive than he was. I picked up the folder again, pressed it against my chest. My voice dropped to a whisper, but the kind that carried more force than any shout. "You can keep your key. I'll keep the record." Then I turned toward the door, the weight of Exhibit A grounding me as I walked away. Behind me, the silence was thick, punctured only by the faint clink of the key slipping uselessly back onto the tray of untouched pastries. Morning broke with a cruel kind of brightness. sunlight spilling across my desk as if the world didn't know what had happened the night before. I was still in the same clothes Exhibit A folder within arm's reach when the envelope arrived. Hand-delivered slipped under my door. It wasn't sealed in ceremony. It was rough torn at the edges, stuffed hastily. I crouched to pick it up, the weight of it heavier than paper alone. Inside were credit reports, page after page printed in bold, sterile typeface. At first, I didn't understand. Then the numbers leapt out at me. Accounts opened in my name balances I had never charged, debts ballooning where there should have been none. My breath caught as I flipped page after page. Credit cards I hadn't applied for, loans I hadn't touched. And every line bound me to chains I never chose. At the top of the stack was a sticky note, neon yellow, slapped across the first page in handwriting I knew too well. Sharp looping letters, Celine's flourish. You want war? You got it. The words hit harder than any shout in last night's living room. My fingers trembled, the paper rattling like dry leaves in my hands. War. That's what she called it. She had turned my attempt at truth into a battlefield willing to scorch everything if it meant keeping her crown. For a moment, my chest caved in the walls of the room, pressing closer. They had stolen money, property, my fellowship, my place in every frame. And now they wanted to stain my name, ruin the one thing I had kept spotless, my record. I sank into the chair, the credit report spread across the desk like a crime scene. My pulse roared in my ears, but under the panic, something steadier stirred, a grim, unshakable resolve. Because if it was war Celine wanted, then it wouldn't be fought with captions or speeches. It would be fought with precision. I reached for my laptop. The cursor blinked at me, a silent metronome. Slowly, deliberately, I logged into every joint account tied to my name. Accounts I had been added to without permission, accounts my parents had once insisted made us closer as a family. I had stayed quiet, then letting them intertwine my financial veins with theirs. But now silence was poison. One by one, I clicked through the settings. Close account, confirm. Close account, confirm. With every confirmation, I felt a thread snap, a tether cut. Years of entanglement dissolved into finality. Their safety net of my savings, my credit, my name, it was unraveling. My hands steadied as the confirmations piled up. Notifications pinged back cold and clinical joint account closed. Access revoked, authorized user removed. Each message was a brick laid on my side of the war. When the last account blinked shut, I sat back in the chair exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours. The reports were still spread across the desk, their accusations bold and heavy, but my voice when it came was steady. They wanted war. Fine, but I don't play with borrowed weapons. I cut the supply. I picked up the sticky note again, Celine's handwriting taunting me in neon ink. I turned it over, pressed it flat against the desk, and on the blank side I scrawled my own words in thick black pen. Accounts closed. Game over. I slipped it back into the folder, sliding it between the credit reports as if to answer her declaration. Because this wasn't just defense anymore. It was escalation. Outside, the world hummed on cars, passing children, laughing life, continuing untouched. But in my kitchen, in the silence I had chosen, I knew the battlefield had shifted. They could smear my name, crop my image, toast my erasure. But they could no longer spend my future. I whispered to the empty room, each word a vow stitched into the morning air. You wanted war. You got it. But you'll regret underestimating the quiet one. The courthouse steps were slick with dew, the sky a flat gray that carried no promise of light. People moved in clusters, murmuring low, clutching manila folders and bitter paddles. It smelled faintly of wet concrete and paper business disguised as routine. But for me, every breath felt like the edge of something I had been building toward in silence. Amara walked beside me, her stride steady, her blazer sharp, her briefcase held like a weapon. She didn't speak much that morning. She didn't need to. Her presence was an anchor proof that I wasn't imagining this, that I wasn't still trapped in Selena's narrative. Today was numbers, contracts, deposits, truth made tangible. Inside the auction hall, voices echoed off sterile walls. A clerk rattled off addresses and debts, each property reduced to digits and terms. When they called the Hanover Drive house, my stomach clenched so tightly I thought I might fold in two. My childhood pressed itself against my ribs. Birthday candles on that back porch whispered secrets in the upstairs hallway, the smell of my mother's lemon polish that never truly faded. All of it lined up on the block like merchandise. Amara raised her hand, calm and precise. A number left her lips clear and controlled. The auctioneer nodded. Another bidder hesitated, then dropped out. The gavel struck wood. Sold. It was so quick, so clinical. Years of memory, decades of family reduced to a single sound of wood on wood. My throat tightened, but before grief could crush me, Amara slid her phone across the table. A text blinked on the screen, her message short, decisive and almost tender in its brevity. "It's yours." I stared at the words until they blurred. Mine. For so long, ownership had been stolen, erased, cropped out of frames. And now here it was handed back, not as inheritance, not as approval, but as a transaction I had chosen. Proof that silence had ended. We walked out into the gray morning. The air smelled cleaner, sharper, as if even the sky understood something had shifted. Amara squeezed my shoulder once before turning to her car. "Go," she said simply. "See it." I drove with both hands tight on the wheel, the streets familiar but strange. When I pulled up to the house, the driveway was empty. No champagne glasses, no fairy lights, just silence, deep and waiting. The key turned in the lock with a click that sounded louder than any toast. The door swung open and I stepped inside. The living room was the same, yet not. The furniture had been staged for years in Celine's image. Fluffed cushions, curated angles, gallery of photos that rewrote me out of existence. But now, without her, without the performance, the space felt bare, as if the lies had been packed up and carted off with the last moving van. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing against the hardwood. My hand trailed along the wall where the photo collage had once hung. My reflection flickered faintly in the glass of a forgotten frame. For the first time, I wasn't at the edges. I wasn't cropped out. I wasn't standing invisible at the curb. I was here, in the center. I stepped into the middle of the living room and turned in a slow circle, letting the silence hold me. My chest rose and fell, each breath heavier, fuller. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but they didn't fall. They balanced there, suspended like proof of how long I had waited to stand where I belonged. This was more than property. It was reclamation. This was a stage where Celine had been crowned, where my parents had toasted, where I had been erased. And now, with no one watching, I stood steady, unedited, undeniable. I whispered into the empty air, my voice low but clear. "This is mine. Finally mine." The words filled the room, bounced off the walls, pressed into the wood and plaster like a brand. For the first time, the house echoed me back. And I knew even if the war wasn't over, even if their narratives clawed and raged beyond these walls inside here, I had claimed something permanent. Proof. Space. Center. They came in the late afternoon, unannounced, their car crunching across the gravel drive I now owned. The house smelled of fresh paint and open windows, no longer of lemon polish and performance. For the first time, it felt breathable. Mine. The knock was sharp, rehearsed. I opened the door halfway, and there they were, Corinne with her pearls, slightly askew Celine in sunglasses too large for her pale face. Neither looked as certain as they used to. Their smiles were brittle edges cracking. "Iris," my mother began, voice-pitched in that familiar pleading softness. "This has gone far enough. We're family. We can fix this if you'd just..." Celine cut her off, eyes hidden but voice trembling with urgency. "I need you to understand. The credit accounts, the transfers, none of it was personal. It was survival. You've always been so steady. You can help us make it right." Her words landed like stones, desperate heavy. They wanted me to fold the way I always had, to patch over betrayal with silence, to let them slip back into comfort while I paid the cost. But something had changed. I stood taller in the doorway, the deed tucked in a folder on the table behind me, weightier than any toast, brighter than any caption. I thought of the fellowship letter from 2018, hidden away in a drawer. I thought of the cropped photographs, the driveway champagne, the sticky note that sneered, "You want war." And I thought of the morning I stood in the center of this house, my house breathing air that finally echoed my name. My voice came calm, firm, a truth that no applause could distort. Peace isn't applause. It's a locked door with my name on the deed. The words silenced them. My mother's lips parted, then closed. Celine's sunglasses slipped slightly, revealing eyes rimmed with fatigue. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Behind me, the house was still, waiting. I lifted the key in my hand, slid it into the lock. The sound was sharp, final. 2 seconds of silence filled the doorway, heavy with everything unsaid. Then I turned left, them standing on the porch, their reflections caught in the glass like ghosts outside their own story. Inside, the air was steady, quiet mine. You can crop me out of pictures. You can intercept letters. You can even toast my erasure on the driveway. But you cannot rewrite a deed. You cannot steal the echo of my voice in these walls. And you cannot take back the moment I chose to lock the door not to keep myself out, but to keep myself in. This is reclamation. Not of money, not of property, but of narrative, of self, of the right to exist without permission. Have you ever had to stop funding your own disappearance? Stop giving to those who erased you. Comment 1 if you have, 0 if you haven't. And subscribe to hear more real family drama stories, because every silence has a receipt, and every erased voice deserves the last word.